Well, the breach it's an unusual and very sophisticated attack. SolarWinds is a tool used by technology companies, or I'm sorry, groups to monitor infrastructure and systems, make sure that they're operating, functioning properly. Um, this type of attack, we mentioned it's known as a supply chain attack, where the attackers came in and corrupted and weaponized SolarWinds' own product to use against their client base. In September 2019, the attackers accessed the SolarWinds systems, and almost immediately in that same month, the attackers used and injected some code into the SolarWinds software, their development supply chain. It was test code, fairly innocuous, and most likely just a proof of concept to see if it was noticed and detected. Turns out it wasn't. In February 2020, they compiled and deployed what's known as, or what's being called as the Sunburst malware. The malicious code was inserted into Orion platform. Orion is the product of SolarWinds that's the issue. And it was released by SolarWinds as an update to their clients beginning in February 20th of 2020. Now, March through May, as these clients had downloaded the malware, that malware phoned home and basically said, "Hey, I'm here. I've been installed, and here's some artifacts to things that I found on the network." Those artifacts then led to identifying who had been infected, and the attackers then basically profiled and probably prioritized the list. And in May is when they actually had hands-on keyboards for the customers that were affected. Now that the hands-on keyboards from the attackers to those clients that were affected was a very extended period of time. It was estimated May 2020 through December 2020 until it was found out. They tried to cover their tracks. So in June of 2020, the attackers removed the malicious code from SolarWinds so that if there were scans, presumably it wouldn't have been found. It was finally found out by one of their customers, FireEye, which was another security, well-known security company. They had some pen test tools that were stolen, and they did a bunch of research and come to find out that the breach came through the SolarWinds product that they were using. And then it was finally released to the public. The attack was disclosed on December 12th. And since then, we've heard a lot of repercussions. As an example, December 31st, Microsoft disclosed that their source code had been accessed. From approximately July 20th through December 20th, the attackers had access to the SolarWinds customer systems and pretty much unfettered access. So out of the 33,000 customers SolarWinds claims using their software, about 18,000 of those clients downloaded the software. Some of those are major government agencies, 425 of the Fortune 500 companies, all of the top 10 telecommunication companies, the top 5 accounting firms, Microsoft, Cisco Networks, Palo Alto Networks. It's been quite extensive.
These kind of attacks get at a different than prior type of attacks when there's supply chain, because it's a trusted type of attack. You're trusting these partners in the process of and in your supply chain, and so it creates another anxiety, a set of fear, a set of things that you need to pay attention to and learn from as you go forward. So I look at this as something that is not going to be unusual in the future. This is with the evolution of technology, the evolution of contracting out many things. Like I do, I contracted out half of my IT at JPL, and you have to be vigilant on all parts, and so now you have to start designing in place that for security, you have to design where trust is not assumed. And so as you look at your supply chain, I really do feel that in this particular one, there's so much to be learned because it's still ongoing. But my first reaction when I heard of this is how far did they get? It sounds like the breadth is pretty large. Who will they go after? Because if they are able to inject their code into systems, as I understand it, they will then gain access to various systems. Most likely, they won't try to get after 18,000 companies, but they may go after some very interesting ones. Unfortunately, JPL tends to be very interesting to a lot of nation states. So we have to take precaution. Now, we don't think we were impacted by this based on my conversations with the security teams. But you still have to be vigilant, even if you don't think you've been impacted, and make sure all the tools and all the capabilities are reviewed. So we did that. We'll keep monitoring, and because we're funded by the government, we'll also have access to classified briefings and things like that, so we can understand the real nature of the attack as we know more. And that's unfortunately the real key message here is we don't know enough yet, but we know enough to plan for the future that you've got to stay vigilant.
I think it's really Jim mentioned the breadth of the attack. So in the past, most of the attacks that we heard were localized to the victim. So an attacker would go after a potential target. If they were successful, they would breach their systems, install malware, multiple backdoors, so that if some were found out, that they would have other opportunities to get in. And then they'd spend time in there and figure out what they have access to and how they can take advantage of it. This is much different because in the supply chain attack, I'm just going to let me paint a worst case scenario just to kind of illustrate an answer to the question. So on that list of clients for SolarWinds is Cisco networks and Microsoft networks. Worst case scenario, let's say, for instance, they were affected and these attackers are very sophisticated, and they were able to, when they had the hands on the keyboard before anybody knew about this, were able to plant multiple backdoors and get into their supply chain. Cisco Networks supplies routers for the internet. They basically are the internet. As far as connectivity goes, there's a lot of other companies that do it, but they have a huge market share. If they were breached and their supply chain was interrupted, and they were able to do the same thing and be able to plant a backdoor into Cisco's code, it could be catastrophic. So that's the main difference, is rather than talking about one victim, you're talking about exponential victims potentially.
Okay. Yeah. Pretty scary stuff. Jim, is there things that you could share about how JPL has been dealing with this breach for all of us to learn from?
So I think, I think again, we've investigated it. We understand the nature of the attack. I think it's very important to work with the suppliers that are named in the attack and make sure that, and we have, that we understand what fixes we need from Microsoft, from Palo Alto, from the companies that we deal with. We're not a SolarWinds customer, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't be. It doesn't mean we couldn't be impacted. So we have to look at the suppliers, make sure that they are keeping us up to date on their version of the attack. and make sure we communicate that to all our technical teams to make sure that the right fixes are in place. The other is, how do you communicate about this? I know you may ask me that later, but inside JPL, you get a lot of engineers who will worry about this. And so it's important for the team to convey confidence and convey technical capability, as well as translate that to management talk, so that people know how to talk with that. Because, for example, I saw 60 Minutes, I guess it was a few weeks ago, had a story on this. And the first thing I thought about was, oh my God, we're going to get a whole bunch of questions from the board of trustees, or we're going to get questions from the leadership. And that's typically how it happens. And be prepared for how to discuss this. And so that's internally how you would look at that. Externally, though, you would look at, who are the actors. You would try to find out who the main actors are, and look for indicators of compromise, and look for signatures that these particular actors like to make when they are able to breach a system or a set of systems. Having been through something like this before, not the breadth of this, but something like this before, where the attackers get so far in, but they don't get all the way in, you learn how to determine that. Usually it's a human error, and you close it, mitigate it, track it, report it, and hopefully have it resolved and architecturally fix it for the next time.
So how do you communicate this if you do have a breach?
Yeah. Well, I having unfortunately had to communicate one too many, is that you have to do the translation. As CIO, had to do the translation between technical to executive, and change the conversation from the technical talk to more about the impact. And sometimes you had to tell the bad news. Sometimes you had to say, we don't know enough yet. Sometimes you had to say, we haven't mitigated, but we're still watching. You never want to declare victory. All that means is you're setting yourself up for success, for failure. And so you just want to convey confidence to whoever, whether it's board of trustees, or whether it's, I've also been on boards of a nonprofit that got attacked, and and asked the questions. So I was on the other side of the questions, and it's very important that you allow the presenter to convey the facts, and that you stick with the facts. Let the technical teams deal with speculation. And I'll tell you one quick story. We had someone do a presentation who was trying to be impressive, and they mentioned that our great big deep space network could be vulnerable to attack. And they tried to demonstrate how that could happen. It turns out that was not true at all, but it worried the executives so much that we had to go through a whole bunch of work to prove that that was not the case. So it's very hard to prove a negative, and so we had to spend that time doing that. So be careful how you communicate. Technical teams need the freedom to communicate the way they want, but control the communication enough, but with honesty, transparency, and fact base versus speculation is my recommendation, having been through this one too many times.
I think that's a webinar in itself, but just at a high level, Jim covered some very good points. First of all, keep it fact-based. Make sure that you're disclosing what is necessary, and also be thinking about what's really at risk as far as the business is concerned, and keeping your communication zeroed in on the risk and how best to mitigate it with the facts that you currently have. As far as communicating to customers, that goes back to my comment about a larger subject, but we tried to always be proactive. And I established a core group across all of many departments. It had representation from legal, from HR, from PR, IT, executive, And what we did was we went through some worst case scenarios. What would happen if X, Y, or Z happened? And we'd basically declare it, and that team would then go through the process. What would we have to do? And so we had canned PR scripts that were ready to go. We had gone out to security companies and pre-negotiated terms for doing forensics. And I'll tell you, if you do that when you don't have a problem, you have a lot better leverage, and it is a lot cheaper if you do that. But that kind of planning, that pre-planning, is really helpful. And establishing a team like that, you know, it doesn't. Everybody has their day jobs, but if you can have them put in 8 hours, 16 hours a month to, you know, work on that, and just over time chunk it away, and have that plan in place, it makes a heck of a lot of difference if something were to happen. It's a little bit, yeah, that all of that is true. But if you think about it, when you have a gun to your head, and things are, you know, the stuff hits the fan, you're not thinking as straight as you could be. And so if you do that pre-planning, and you have the scripts, and you've run through the scenarios, um, you've already planned for what you can anticipate. And I'll guarantee that there's a lot of what you don't know that you didn't anticipate, that you could then spend your cycles on handling that, rather than the stuff that you could pre-plan for.
And let me just weigh in real quick, Henry, real quick, is that executives expect and boards expect a sense of urgency without a sense of panic. And that's
Yep.
really to Bob's point,
Yep.
that we make sure that, you know, we're conveying the confidence, and that they're receiving that confidence.